I hate that saying. I never believed that saying. I never said it to anybody. I would discourage people from saying it. I just, as an assistant, I would be on too many mixes where you just couldn't. So, and I never understood that. So I don't hear people say it a lot now, and I wonder why that is. I think it's because they're not really thinking about the mix. They're thinking about adding more stuff. Engineering is now data collection. So this idea of fix it and mix, I never internalized. I just don't. I think that you need to listen as you go. I think you need to take a shot. You know, if in the land of 150 tracks, if one or two of them aren't what you wanted, well, nobody's going to hear it. But more importantly, you'll have to deal with it so that next time you know what you need to do. So that idea of making decisions, not making decisions, is so misplaced. You've really got to take a shot. You know, as somebody said to me once, we're not, it's a 4-minute piece of music. We're not doctors. Nobody's going to die. Make a decision. So fix it in the mix is not something that I believe, I champion, or suggest. All the things that I see that have changed drastically because of Pro Tools, the biggest one is communication. For the performers on the other side of the glass, as it were, and in many cases now because of home recording, the virtual glass, there's very little feedback from the producers. There's very little guidance in terms of performance because they know they have acres and acres of real estate to collect data, and very often the guidance is do another one. And from the world I come from, of limited real estate, 24-track analog recording, that wasn't really part of the process. You had to be listening and making decisions as you go, and if there's anything that's happening now, that's not happening. All the decisions are being held into the mix session, and that's not a good environment for good mixes. Having unlimited tracks, my personal opinion is that it's a bad thing, and that's coming from the standpoint of an educator, and also as an engineer. But my more pragmatic answer is that it's just different. The style of production is different, and people responding to it, and there are good records being made. I think that it's hard to learn something without limitations. And when there are no limitations, people aren't encouraged to make decisions. So, if you make a decision, then you have to deal with the consequences of the decision. If you never make any, you're usually finding that stuff out in the mix, or you're dealing with a multitude of people not making decisions. So the producer's not making decisions, the engineer hasn't made any decisions, and then when you get to the mix, you're not mixing, you're making decisions. And the old paradigm was that lots of decisions were being made as you approached the mark. So I don't think unlimited tracks are necessarily a good thing. I think it takes a certain amount of discipline to understand what that is. But if you have new users coming to the fore, they don't have a context. Anybody that's done any kind of recording prior to doing that has some context to work with it. I don't want to do it that way. I only want to keep 5 of those. Simple things like that. But for the average new user, they're not coming to it with that. They're coming to eyes wide open and willing to explore and go down many, many paths. And I don't necessarily see that as a good part of the process. It makes the whole process in some way a little bit less compelling. I don't think you can all of a sudden make the decisions, but I think that the users are convinced that with the power of the system, they can do it. I think that there's a subtle shift in the way that recordings are done because of the power of these systems. Every recording they make is viewed in some way as a flaw that needs to be corrected. So why listen? I mean, listen, there's nothing happening in real time now. If you're talking digital, well, it takes a certain amount of time just to process that signal. We're all dealing with latency. We see video feeds that are delayed relative to the figure we're seeing on stage. So as we get into the digital domain, everything is just being offset. Everything is delayed. People, again, they're setting up a recording and then having a conversation with the people in the control room and not really listening because they're going to listen later. Or somebody is willing to take hours of their life and deal with all these multitude of choices that haven't been made. So I think that the context is really important, and I think that as just like you and I, when we learn, as we struggle with analog, it takes lots of time in going to the well to get some sort of understanding of that. I think that what's not embedded in the workstation and digital technology is this understanding, or this willingness to streamline the approach and find faster and more efficient ways. The fact that people aren't spending a lot of money for studio time means that everybody's very lackadaisical about the kind of time they're spending. The fact that there's a prevalence of home studios means that it's kind of seeped into the consciousness from the musician side of things that things can take as long as they want. So when I say things are less compelling, that's what I mean, is that there's no real agenda to try and get this done faster and really capture a musical idea and elicit a performance, which is what people respond to emotionally. There's this misplaced thought that you can create a performance through the power of the system. Again, for people that have context, they're brutal. They make decisions, they set up shortcuts. They know going in that they're only going to take, 2 or 5 of something. And when it gets to the 6th one, they're going to make a decision, or they're going to name it. Very much paradigms that have existed since analog. Which, like, if you're going to, and what I learned in analog was when the red light goes on, write it down, but not until the red light goes on. You don't write down intent, you write down what's there. So that issue of documentation and commitment doesn't really exist now. I think the lack of decision making ends up making people spend a lot more time on this stuff. I mean, months. There's this tremendous amount of time that's spent, quote unquote, offline. Either it's an assistant that's doing it, or somebody that's doing it that's off the quote unquote the grid in terms of the actual recording. And I did a lot of work in Pro Tools prior to my deciding I didn't want to. And what I was finding, stylistically or methodically, the way that people work, is because you can just open up the file and there's the balance, there's very little exploration of the balance. And that was part of the aspect of working in analog that was intriguing and a point of discovery, is that you had to build that balance each time. And sometimes there would be something that happened that was kind of cool. Maybe that's cool, the bass drum works that loud. But also you'd know what was there. So what I would find is that you'd open up a file, and from a production and arranging point, because things never changed, people would be adding things to the production based on what they were hearing, that balance. So I'd come in to mix something, and people would be hearing parts, and what is that? It sounds like a monkey playing the solo. That's a direct quote. So I don't know, this is your, So there are things that people never hear because they're making judgments on a fixed balance that's good enough for now, but not anything approaching what the mix is going to be, because they can't know that, because they have so many elements they're keeping that, it's all fluid. So it's a very different concept. So on the one hand, it could be fast. Somebody could be very happy with that balance, come up, but work on it for an incredibly long time. So I don't know at the point, I think there's a point where fast comes in, but I don't know where that point comes in. I think, again, it comes down to context, somebody knowing when they got what is right. When they have something they know is the definitive version of what they want. And again, I think that comes from experience and knowing which path you want to go down as you power on.